Welcome back to the Poor Proles Almanac. In this episode, it's sponsored by Norm's Nuts. Norm describes himself as nut blind when it comes to his nuts. They can dangle from trees or be below your feet. If they're nutty, he's nuts for them.
Wow. Thank you, Norm. What a true gentleman.
That's Norm's Nut Emporium down on 420 John Brown Drive. Mention this episode and you'll get 31% off your order.
That's my 69% for your nuts. Got it. Thanks. Thanks, buddy. I guess something's gotten into Andy today.
It's not me, it's Norm.
Norm got into Andy today.
Norm got into Andy. Those nuts got into me, I guess. I don't know. So today we are talking about the root nut, the earth nut, the potato bean, Apios hopnus, or what it's best known by our great funding giant Norm, groundnuts, or the anal bead nut.
I guess that's one way to describe it.
But I mean, seriously, it does kind of look like that. And it's 2024, so, you know, we can talk about it.
Can we?
Yeah, we can. We can do whatever we want. These are our microphones, and despite the best efforts of God, Dom is fighting the good fight for us. For people that are listening, I have replaced every piece of equipment and I still have static, so I am haunted or I've being smitten by God.
And that's what I'm saying. I mean, maybe you just need holy water. Maybe you're just looking at this from the wrong angle.
I don't think that's it. It's Norm and Dom against God, and I'm honestly, I wouldn't side against Norm.
No, Norm is more powerful than God, certainly.
If there's anything we've learned from this show, and there isn't much, that is it.
They're going to bring this out as evidence at, like, the New Salem witch trials.
If that's how I go out, like, I'm not even mad. Like, that is... You got to finesse your death, and that's one way to really do it, you know?
Ugh, I wouldn't call that a success.
Anyways, let's talk about groundnuts. Folks are probably at least familiar with the term or have heard of Apios or something like that. Now, what makes them really special is that they're a nitrogen-fixing root crop that is native to at least eastern North America to the Mississippi or so, maybe a little bit further west than that. And it's been harvested for like 10,000 years. It was also one of the earliest native crops to find its way to Europe, documented as early as 1585. Basically, people showed up, were like, I'm starving to death. Hey, cool, there's this wild food that's everywhere. Let's bring it back home. Now, it's part of Fabaceae, and it's part of the pea family. And while the beans, like the peas themselves, they look like dried up peas, I guess, like brown peas. They're not really like the primary crop. They don't like produce a ton of them, especially further north, which we're going to talk about. They are important for like procreating these plants. You know, their nitrogen fixing capacity makes a lot more sense when you realize that like it's not necessarily a root crop first, or like biologically that's not like the most important part to it, right? It's a pea plant that has a giant root to it.
Gotcha. But we still get the beans and the roots in the same plant, which is pretty fun.
Yeah. Now, unlike many of the species we've covered to date, Apios doesn't appear to have any unique, like, specialist relationships with pollinators. In all of the studies that I could find, it was primarily like leafcutter bees and honeybees, which do enjoy the flowers, but they still seem to have some like pretty poor reproductive success, which to me would suggest that they had probably co-evolved with another specialist pollinator that probably doesn't exist anymore.
Womp womp.
Very sad, right? I have a hard time believing that there weren't ever the specialist pollinators, but it's also possible that they could just have been a generalist plant forever.
I mean, it couldn't decide if it wanted to be a bean crop or a root crop, so it's possible.
Anything's possible. To back up a bit, the genus Apios has 3 species that are native to Asia, 2 that are found in North America. Apios americana is native to eastern North America, as I'd said. It goes from Canada down to Florida to Texas, and generally you'll find it in like damp or waterlogged soils. So like around ponds, rivers, streams, wetlands, bogs, you name it.
I mean, that's quite the range. It's kind of hard to imagine like the same species in Texas as it is like out on New Brunswick. But like here we are talking about the species that runs the whole range of the continent.
Yeah, now the oldest documentation from the west of Apios comes from a guy named Thomas Harriot. This guy is kind of a nobody, but he also accompanied Sir Walter Raleigh on his expedition in 1584. Folks in North Carolina, your best friend, Walter, Wally, as he's known by the locals. In his writing, Thomas describes Opanoc, which are a root that he describes as of the bigness of walnuts that are fastened with a string that are boiled to be eaten.
No comment.
Over 1,000 miles north in New England, John Brereton describes the same, stating that, in quote, in every island, in almost every part of every island, are great store of groundnuts 40 together on a string, some of them as bigger as hen's eggs.
I mean, 40 seems like it might be too many.
I mean, if it's too many, you're not trying hard enough, Matt. That's all I'm going to say. Now, seriously, though, I've never actually seen any, like, even remotely to that scale. I think this might have been one of those, like, inflationary descriptions when they were trying to get people to send more money to the New World. I've seen like a dozen on a route. I think that's probably the most, and that might even be a little bit of a stretch. But what is interesting from this quote and why I wanted to bring it up is that they were ubiquitous over the eastern half of the continent. You have people describing in North Carolina and Massachusetts the same thing of how common these are and how centered they are on food systems, despite like the Wampanoag eating a very different diet than otherwise, at least, than tribes in the southeast. So it really was like a central focal part of indigenous diets at this time. And there didn't seem to be anywhere where they weren't being consumed.
Yeah, we haven't really mentioned them in like another deep dive episode in terms of like being found at indigenous sites.
Yeah, and there have been a few which we're going to talk about, but to your point, typically when they go to find what remains are there, it's usually like nutshells and seeds from fruits or pits. So we don't actually really know the volume of consumption that was going on, because if you've got a groundnut, you eat the whole thing. The only thing that might remain are the pods, the peas, the beans, but if they weren't typically eating them, then they probably would have left them where they were harvesting. So we don't really know a lot. Now, Colonel James Smith, under captivity by the Delaware, describes eating the potatoes boiled and dipped in raccoon fat.
You know, I'd try that. I wonder how raccoon fat tastes.
I imagine it is very delicious because raccoons are magnificent beasts.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, they were boiled alone, or they were cooked with meat or corn, or they were just roasted directly in hot ashes.
Okay, so basically you can like treat them the same as potatoes.
Basically, yeah. Additionally, the Menominee made preserves by boiling the tubers in maple syrup.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know that sounds delicious, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Typically, it was like when they would cook them not in maple syrup, it was a food for summer. And according to early reports from the colonists showing up, they're typically eaten in June, July, and August alongside like berries and fish. And the idea was like, all right, your corn's not ready to be harvested yet. Nuts aren't ready to be harvested yet. There's like fresh greens, but you still need kind of that staple, right? But despite this, there's also a lot of reports of tubers that were being peeled and dried for winter storage. And like I said before, sometimes they're stored in maple syrup, and they were often described as a winter food, regardless of location, from the south to the north. For all of our American listeners, everyone knows the mashed potatoes is like a part of Thanksgiving, right? But actually, at the first Thanksgiving, it was groundnuts that were served. So I don't think the date's right, and I didn't look this up, but I think the original Thanksgiving was like closer to October or something like that. Which would make a little bit more sense, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that they were calling potatoes was the groundnut at that first Thanksgiving. Like, I think it's really interesting because, like, we've covered at this point in the very brief time we've been on the capacity of the groundnut to like do all this different stuff, right? And that it could stretch this giant landscape. And it was so important to like be a summer crop during like the early summer lull, and to be a storable winter crop, and to be something that could be grown in places that typically don't grow annuals in wetlands. So like it had all these really unique characteristics that made it really valued by like indigenous communities across the entire eastern coast.
Yeah, and you could pretty much just like leave it in the ground until you needed it, right?
Exactly. So it's like perfect storage. Like you don't even have to really preserve it as long as the ground isn't completely frozen. So the plants themselves kind of danced between this idea of like a crop and a wild harvested food. According to William Cronin, who wrote the book Changes on the Land, the groundnuts were harvested wild, but also planted along hunting trails and clearings in the forest. So, here in Massachusetts, you have a lot of towns that are called like Wakefield, Topsfield, and like a lot of them were based on the fact that when colonists showed up, they were just these giant fields. And in many cases, these fields were actually planted heavily with groundnuts. And when hunting groups would go through these clearings, if they were overnight or whatever, they would stop and be able to just dig up a bunch of groundnuts, have some dinner, continue on their way. So like the fact that they were planting them this aggressively and extensively points to the fact that while they weren't necessarily a domesticated crop, they weren't fully wild either, because I don't doubt that in those plantings, they were selecting for the best ones, right? Because that's kind of what people do, or that's what indigenous people did across the entire continent. So why wouldn't they have done it with these, right? And like the fact that they were that available compared to today, where they exist, but they really only exist in certain places, like speaks to like how much of an impact management had on their ability to like expand across the landscape.
Yeah. I mean, I've only seen groundnuts like in just a few places, and they've got those like really beautiful red flower clusters that like smell really nice and are like kind of that distinctive pea flower shape.
Yeah, and I mean they're gorgeous. They're like, if you've never seen them, they're like very dark red, and they're very just large. I mean the flowers themselves, but like the cluster itself is pretty large. And typically like here, I'll typically see them on like spice bush around an edge of a pond. Yeah, and they're just like this nice little color. And you see, once you know what you're looking for and you see like the leaf pattern and the vine, like, because it's a super thin vine, and it's kind of got like a papery look to it a little bit. And so you like know what it is right away once you know what you're looking for.
Oh, just to like be on the edge of a pond. So nice.
Yeah, right? They're living better than most of us. Given their prominence in the diets of so many indigenous communities, there have been some tubers or residues from tubers that have been dug up on some sites in Red Cloud, Nebraska, near a historical Pawnee village, as well as 4 Ozark sites. And another one in Mississippi, they were found alongside corn, which I think is interesting because like we've talked about how when corn showed up, a lot of the other staple crops kind of became like very secondary, right? But the groundnut continued to be kind of important, which I think is really, really cool and interesting, and like speaks to its like resilience and significance.
Listen, you got 2 types of nuts. You can give up one, but you can't give up all your nuts. It's too much.
Yeah, we're staunchly not nut free here in North America.
That sounds like a weird like anti-woke like boomer bumper sticker.
Fuck them allergic kids.
Yeah. And I've always said that. I've always said that like allergies, schmallergies, you know what I mean?
I've heard you say that. It's true. I mean,
yeah.
Last time I saw you, you're like, your kid has a nut allergy, have some peanuts.
Yeah.
Fuck them kids.
I just like take a few out of my pockets and just like sort of scatter them around the house.
Or at public schools.
Or a public school.
Wherever.
Yeah, anywhere that there's airports, certainly train stations.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
They're going to play this clip on the news. Jesus
yes,
Christ.
Probably.
You put me up to it, Judge.
Yes, this is all my fault.
He's the real anti-allergy boomer.
Yes, it all comes out. So we've talked about this idea that like indigenous settlements were managed to support primarily plants around them that were important, useful. I mean, we talked about like Kentucky coffee tree. Basically, every plant we talk about, we can talk about how like it was chosen and important, right?
I mean, we were just talking about, or not just, we were earlier talking about hickories, right?
And oaks.
And the chinkapins.
And the black walnuts.
And like literally all of the fruit episodes that we did.
Yeah, so you get the point. For the groundnut, we talked about it's kind of in these wetter areas. And this is something you could find in like underneath the canopy of like black walnuts, pawpaws, groundnuts, spicebush. Like they all kind of enjoy a similar ecosystem. Those are places that we could start to see these kind of like managed forest systems around indigenous communities.
Yeah, and like, I don't know, food forests is kind of like a buzzword right now, but just like check out the wetlands of southeastern and like mid-Atlantic North America.
Yeah, they got it figured out. You just got to restore it. And they're native. You can't fuck anything up. You don't need autumn olive. Just saying, you don't.
Well, that's the other thing, is I do take autumn olive pits and just sort of scatter them around public places. Yeah, I know no one's allergic, but like,
it just, the plant needs to breathe.
Yeah.
So
I like to scatter it in
rare ecotype habitats.
Yeah, stuff that's really impacted by a rise in soil nitrogen. Anywhere that's
really
going to happen and displace other species, perfect.
I mean, really, you're just accelerating the evolution of the plant. You're making them better. And if they don't want to be better, that's not on you. True.
I'm a evolutionary accelerationist.
There's a niche political group for that, all right?
Ugh,
it's a thing.
And I don't want to meet them.
I guarantee you it's a thing. So the colonists who arrived like back in the 15th, 16th century, 17th century, described arriving at like various hunting campsites where the indigenous hunters had dug up these massive stretches of groundnuts in those fields. And again, it was like this, like, the descriptions are insane because they just like describe like, oh, this was a field yesterday and a hunting crew must have come through because now it's all dug up. And it's just like the scale is just like insane. A common trend that we have seen when discussing these native crops here in North America is this idea of like multiple or usually two primary lines of genetics, right? So we saw that with pawpaw, we saw that with hickories, we saw that with oaks where it was 4. So like we start to see these kind of like breakouts of genetic lines, right? Now in groundnut, something similar exists. There's what's called a triploid form that predominates like most of the northern range of the species, and there's a diploid form for much of the south. Now it's suggested that a combination of the triploid and south incompatibility is the cause of the sterility of the species over much of that range.
I mean, didn't we read that the like entire northern range is like basically genetically identical, which is why they're like incapable of producing viable seed?
So that's something I've heard multiple times, but I haven't actually seen any papers that back that argument. Although I don't necessarily think it's wrong. I'd be willing to bet at the very least they're like so genetically similar that they're very incapable of breeding. But that does, going back to this point of landscape management, has some like really big implications about like, we're talking about Minnesota to New Brunswick. Like that is not an insignificant amount of land to be like, we all have the same genetic identical plant that can't cross-pollinate. So the only way it is spreading is through tubers being replanted or shared, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like, same plant, like thousands of miles, and the time it would take to produce enough tubers to like spread over the continent. That's like, it's huge. I mean, that's landscape management for like a food crop at a scale that's like absolutely wild.
Yeah, without like modern industrial technology, right?
Right.
Apios in the U.S. is also split into 2 species. And I mentioned that earlier. There's Medicus and Robinson.
Which team are you on?
I'm Team Medicus. Come on.
Okay.
Sounds Greek. Sounds very threatening. And Robinson's just Fuck that guy.
Robinson.
Yeah, exactly. So Medicus is the groundnut that most folks reading this are familiar with, while Robinson is basically this super rare species that is ecologically, we don't want to lose it, or I don't want to like downplay it and be like, fuck that plant. But it does offer a lot less in terms of like human consumption. So It's less of an interest for us for the purposes of this podcast.
I get it. I guess I'm also Team Medicus then.
Okay. So Robinson typically grows in like rocky open woodlands, while Medicus or Apios americana thrives in those forests, thickets, riverbanks, wetlands, wet prairies, things like that. Some folks have crossbred them because what's the point of being human if you don't try to play God once in a while?
Mm-hmm.
But from what I've read, the results have been basically like infertile plants.
They get like a little mule plant.
Yeah, basically. Mule plants.
That's fun, though.
Yeah, love me a good mule plant.
To be human is to try to get plants to do strange things.
Every day we stray further from God.
Mm-hmm. Every day we do a little to push the hand back.
Yeah. Trying to get smitten.
Mm-hmm. Smote.
Smote is smoten.
Smarted.
Now, at this point, we've talked about like a lot of the history, the fact that like it continued to be a food crop and a staple crop and a significant crop for colonists because they couldn't figure out how to fucking grow food and not destroy the continent for the first couple hundred years. Despite all of this, the groundnut never really like captured any like memorialized attention in the country, right? And what's particularly interesting about the groundnut is that like it's been here and was significant for a long time. And we watched so far in this show, we've talked about blueberries and pecans, but even strawberries, which are a relatively new crop for our grocery stores, like these native crops that have garnered global attention, but the groundnut still really hasn't, although we're going to put an asterisk on that boy.
Man, we haven't even talked about strawberries.
I know.
What do you have against a strawberry?
It was ranked the most loved fruit in the world. So I'm just kind of like, fuck that fruit. Fuck it.
Icon.
Fuck that fruit. That's like Beyonce a fruit. Like, I don't care what you've done. I'm not going to like you. Sorry.
Damn.
It's nothing personal. It's just your status.
Mm-hmm.
A true anarchist. I don't even like things that are good.
It's called, it's called being a goddamn hipster.
Yeah.
Your taste is also defined by what people like, Andy.
It is. And that's why I create the worst podcast ever. Come on, Matt, keep up.
That's the tagline.
That's what they say about us. So, like I said, there hasn't been a lot of attention on the groundnut, despite the fact all these other plants are just getting their moment in the sun, right? However, 1985, the Patriots went to the Super Bowl and got blown out. America was reeling from this loss of the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
A man named Bill Blackman and another man named Berthel Reynolds began a research project at the Louisiana State University Agricultural Experiment Station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Big fans of the Patriots down there. Big fans.
Famously.
Had to make America great again. Unfortunately, the program was short-lived. It continued for about 9 years until 1994, despite its success. Now, Blackman, who moved away for personal reasons, later commented that he would have not left if he knew the program wouldn't continue without him. In his words, and quote, "I left LSU. I thought they were going to let Bert continue. Bert, because of his name, he continued to work with this plant, but they kind of moved him into doing something else." Now, without Bill's stature, leadership, whatever, the LSU project basically was dead.
Wait, when you were quoting just there, were you quoting from one of your previous episodes?
I did. What are you going to do about it?
Oh my god.
What?
I'm leaving.
Oh, good. Yes, we interviewed Bill Blackman, the only audio interview that I'm aware of that exists with him back like 2 years ago. So go check it out after this. Seems like a really good pairing. Now, the germplasm for this project was collected as seed from primarily the lower Mississippi Valley. Of the 20,000 plants propagated, only a handful were selected for potentially useful breeding material, including one called LA85-034.
Catchy.
Remember that. There is a quiz later, and that's going to be on it. The program expanded and eventually had germplasm from 19 states. Today, the byproduct of this research can be found in the LSU variety, which is LA85-034, which is basically the only named selection formally for groundnut, which is fairly widely available online today.
I mean, you know what we need to do, right?
I mean, given the content of this episode, that could go a lot of ways, Matt.
I mean, I'm talking about we need to breed a norm's groundnut, like a norm variety.
I mean, that would be fun, but we don't really make breeding joke selections of a plant money, Matt.
Look, I'm just saying, like, maybe spill some radioactive, maybe spill some radioactive material on some and see what happens. Just, like, think about it. It worked for Spider-Man.
I don't know if worked is really the right word.
Just get some of those old glasses that contain uranium and just, like, I don't know. Keep them in that for a while.
Slight toxic site just for a little while, see what comes from it. Evolution.
Look, it's okay to want both the Groundnut Breeding Center and the Superfund site.
These are not mutually exclusive.
They contain multitudes.
There you go. Now, work is still being done to breed improved varieties, and a collection of at least 53 accessions remains from the Blackman Reynolds breeding work at the United States Department of Agriculture in Ames, Iowa. Update, in 2010, the breeding work continued, and in 2013, a subset of the collection was evaluated in Virginia and Pennsylvania to assess the effect of environmental variation on genotype performance. Genotype 1972, another good year, was the highest yielding of all genotypes, producing yields similar to sweet potato and yam, which, for specifics, was about 3.34 pounds on one plant.
Damn.
Yeah, right? And this was largely because it produced the largest, in quote, child tuber weight, which is those like secondary smaller tubers on the string.
I mean, 3 1/3 pounds on a barely improved plant is kind of insane.
Yeah, similar in sweet potato and yields, also wild, while also fixing nitrogen.
That's not insignificant.
Not at all. Part of the improvement of Apios as a potential crop isn't just focused on root size, but reduced vining. As I said, they can grow pretty wild. Reduced stolon length, which is that string, so you're not like digging forever trying to pull things up. And fewer larger tubers, which, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
With this in mind, there were 9 genotypes that were identified from this project and are stored to be bred for future improvements. And I'm not going to read through the numbers because
this is an audio format and it doesn't work that well.
If you want to see the numbers, you can go to agroecologies.org and go read it because it's right there. Now, the hope was that the size of the 1972 can be paired with some of those traits from the other selections, which have better versions of all the other things they're worried about, to create an easier to harvest perennial tuber that fixates nitrogen into the soil while also producing caloric content similar to crops that we already grow and spent a lot of money breeding.
I mean, it sounds kind of like the perfect plant. And they're working on this now, or since 2013?
So unfortunately, it seems like this kind of got shelved basically after 2013.
No.
And we are going to talk about that a bit next week. Hint, hint. Now, one of the main challenges of propagating the improved selections quickly is that you're kind of limited by the ability to rapidly scale and basically make copies of that high-yielding variety, right? Based on the research of Bill Blackman, the easiest way to rapidly propagate improved selections of groundnut is through the utilization of cuttings with multiple nodules and then rooting that in water. So despite the fact that you do have all these tubers, which is typically how people sell them, they'll usually grow something out, sell the child tubers, the little ones, and then you have to wait 2 years for them to grow up, basically. But you can also use the cuttings, which you can take a lot more cuttings than you can take tubers, which again, to the point of Apios being this really cool plant, propagation, if you're growing 30 feet of vinage, you can propagate a hell of a lot of plants out of one plant.
Okay, so you and me, we're growing an Apios field for Norm. Just hack one out.
Norm's nuts, parentheses ground, or nuts, comma, ground.
Ground division.
The ground division. This is like his military, you got the Navy, Army. He's got the Air Force, ground force.
Well, yeah, as I understand it, Norm has both a political and a military wing.
That makes so much sense when you say it. Like now all the pieces in my head are kind of coming back together. The gun checkpoints, all that stuff. It really makes a lot of sense. The amount of fertilizer for a guy who is growing tree crops is way too high.
What does he need that fertilizer for? He fixes his own nitrogen.
Exactly.
Never trust a man that grows nitrogen fixing crops, folks.
That is the thing to take away here.
That's the bumper sticker.
There it is. It took a little while, but we got there. The big challenge with the crop, though, is that even though it doesn't require fertilizers, you can fertilize it. It also takes 2 years to grow to full size. And if you're taking the rooted cuttings, it's probably going to take maybe even longer. While it can be difficult to produce significant viable seeds to do cross-pollination genetic stuff, the genetics that do exist in the diploids are extremely diverse, which is also what helped accelerate the breeding work to find improved varieties. I want to make a point here. The LSU variety didn't start with they had harvested the best genetics, like we saw with all the crops that pawpaw and all the selections that Hershey did and J. Russell Smith. They all started with these competitions to start with the best genetics. He didn't. He literally just took seeds from a wide range, not even a wide range, and just said, let's see what comes out of it, and produced this thing that grows to the size of a good sized potato. The genetics are out there. We haven't even tried looking for improved varieties really in the wild. That becomes really evident when you look at some backyard breeders like Ken Asmus, who we had on the podcast a year ago over at Oikos Tree Crops. He's been breeding them personally for his own sales and interests for a couple decades now. And they're honestly, his production is probably similar to LSU, despite the fact it was just one of his many plant hobbies.
I mean, it's so cool when backyard growers, people that are growing at a relatively small scale, can actually produce these incredibly valuable selections that are just meaningful for other people that want to grow it. You've interviewed some people from the Experimental Farm Network on here before. Are they doing anything with groundnuts?
They are. They actually have a variety improved called Billington, which is a hardy variety of a diploid from Montana.
Huh.
Which is pretty cool, right?
What was the name of it again?
Billington.
Oh, that's quite nice. Billington.
Yeah, very British. I knew you'd like it.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the only ones that are breeding these plants. Like a lot of things we've talked about, a lot of Southeastern Asia is really interested in the groundnut. So there's actually a variety called Jeju in South Korea, which is based on an improved plant that they found while doing research. And the island where it was found was called Jeju, so that's what they named it. So there's another genetic. I haven't been able to find that online. I've just read about it, so I don't know if those are available for sale. I'm guessing not, if I haven't seen any for sale before. But if anyone's got some, I'd be curious to get some from you.
So if we buy one of all of these and crossbreed them, can we get Norm's superior groundnuts?
We could.
The shining golden Norm standard.
The golden nut standard. Yeah. I feel the blue ball ribbon. Yeah. Ugh. There you go. Yeah. And to go back to Ken, because he's worked with them for quite a bit, he does have, and he likes to do weird stuff, plants, which I find really fascinating, is he worked with planting them around other stuff that were root crops to see kind of how they interact in that kind of environment. And one of the things he noted is that they tend to grow closer to the surface and they do find growing very close to the surface. So that allows you to have a deeper root crop beneath them, like sunchokes. Now, I've never tried this and I've never really noted them being particularly close to the surface, but in his experience, they seem to do pretty well that way. So that's something to consider, especially if we're thinking about a polyculture, polycrop kind of thing, right? Now, I'd mentioned those vines are paper thin. They die off very quickly from a light frost. They're super light, so they can climb on stuff, which allows them to be a pretty good polycrop vining plant. they're not going to put too much stress on whatever it's climbing as long as what it's climbing is big. So I've personally grown them on sunflowers. Like you get the mammoth sunflowers and you can let them grow right up it and they look great and pretty. And the trunks are like, thick as a quarter. They can handle a tiny little vine climbing up it, especially if you have like a bunch of sunflowers together. So like that's something you can do with it. Or you could, according to Ken, do the same thing with sunchokes.
I mean, that's really nice when you're like, especially because you were saying that this plant takes 2 years to mature. It's like being able to not fully just like use up that whole space, but really like be smart about.
In the first season?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Plus, you're getting native plants all in one place. You're cross-pollinating because sunflowers have tons of generalist bees and pollinators. So like getting them with the Apios is like a win-win because they're also a generalist. So it does have a lot of benefits.
And also that like short season, it gives you a lot of leeway either side for planting out stuff.
Yeah. One last thing I want to mention about breeding has to do with the diploid groundnut. Now, you'll often see if you're looking to buy plants online, and the reason why the experimental farm network plant is such a big deal is that many folks advertise selling plants from New Jersey. Now, this isn't a coincidence. Again, we talked about the diploid versus the triploid genetics. Until recently, climate change, that was basically considered as far north as you could go and still get like a good chance at harvesting those diploid groundnuts. So if you wanted to be able to get the seed so you could plant your own, mess around with the genetics, or just want like hardier plants, that was basically as far north as you could go. Now, personally, I've collected and grown groundnuts from seeds collected here in Massachusetts. Whether that's climate change, luck, or whatever, it can be done.
So can you just remind us the difference between the triploid and the diploid genetics, the sort of better yielding?
So there doesn't seem to be any pointing to the genetics being better yielding. The triploid are just more cold hardy, so that's why you see them basically across the north, and then you see the diploid further south. Historically, we've talked about this before, with polyploidy, typically plants will grow faster, larger, bigger, the fruit bigger, everything bigger. I can't speak to whether or not that's necessarily the case with groundnuts. But again, I do wonder how much that polyploidy is like managed and like if there was like, because it does seem there's been a lot of research about polyploidy being a tool that indigenous people across the globe have used for domestication. So I don't really have an answer to it, but it does really raise some interesting questions.
Cool.
Yeah. Now, I did mention like where you could find them around small ponds and rivers. They do typically, in my experience, like sandier soil, and their vines are often, like I said, nestled in like small bushes. And occasionally, from personal experience, they tend to exist in areas that also have poison ivy.
Bummer, but smart.
As I realized too late last fall. So I do owe an apology to Carissa for that one. Now, their vines dry by the mid-fall, and again, they're very brittle to the touch. Once you've seen it, you're going to know what it is, and then you can just kind of trace it down to the soil, get your finger in there, and within like an inch, you're going to find the first tuber to dig up. With the seeds, if you are trying to like grow viable seeds, start messing around with your own plants, you're going to want to wait until the pods are browned to harvest, or they won't germinate.
I mean, the moral of the story here is let Andy dig them up first.
Exactly. Sacrifice me to the plant gods before the other god smites me.
Mm-hmm. It's all about you. You just got to pick your gods, really.
You really do. I mean, when I was born, I picked the wrong god. That was just a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Now I'm just stuck with him. He's kind of annoying. Yeah, it's a thing. Now, I know I said I had one last thing to talk about. I do have one last thing to talk about. And that is the actual nutritional profile of the groundnut.
Oh, yeah.
So we talked about like it's this big potato-y thing, right? Even though it is kind of potato-y, it actually has 3 times the crude protein content of a potato.
Oh.
So that's kind of a big deal, right? Like,
not too bad.
Yeah, like we talk about calories when we're talking about like feeding people, but really the more important measure is protein. And that's why you can have people that are like have malnutrition, but like be meeting their caloric intakes, is because they're not getting a number of things. But one of the big ones is the protein piece. For that reason alone, it's like a very important crop, and part of why it's been used in places like Japan, despite the fact, like I said, that it's not even consumed readily here. A lot of times it's ground into flour, mixed into baked goods, and basically uses like an additive to improve like nutritional profiles. So again, kind of the whole East Asia region loves groundnuts, not like us. And because of that, they're also doing a lot of research into its health benefits.
I mean, why does like every other country care about our plants but us?
I don't know, man. I don't know. Hopefully we can fix that with our little dog and pony show over here.
Oh, yeah.
And not only does it have this high protein content, it also has a lot of evidence of like anti-inflammatory effects that reduce oxidative damage. They also have anti-diabetic effects from, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sorry, medical people, lipinolpin A compound, from the lipinolpin A compound. That is my final answer. It's been documented to reduce blood pressure and alleviate lung inflammation, even from stuff like H1N1. So like it seems to have some like really good stuff in it. And, we're still at that really preliminary data. And as more research is done, we'll have a better understanding of its potential to like be a part of like a diverse, healthy diet that improves the health of the general public. And that's only if, we can find a way to get it in our diets.
Now, you gotta give us some of your ideas for the groundnut recipes.
You can cook like potatoes. I think...
Well, yeah, but think of the variety that potatoes provide us, the bounty.
Yeah, exactly. There's a million things you could do with it, just like a potato. I think like this is like a really good plant that the keto movement should have gotten on. Like I think that could have hyped it up, because you could have sold it as this very niche, like, here's a potato substitute. You can do everything you do with a potato, but it's high protein and gives your 2-to-1 ratio or whatever it is. So I think that was like a really missed opportunity to make it like more popular. I do think, and at this point we're covering a ton of different plants, or we have at this point covered a ton of different plants that are native. And the running thing I think that becomes obvious is like prepping. Like prepping is always like the major challenge for, making these things viable, right? Like how do you process hickory nuts? Like it's a pain in the ass. How do you process black walnuts? It's a pain in the ass. How do you process sunchokes? Guess what? It's a pain in the ass. So like removing that component by industrializing that side of it, which I think people listening probably don't love the idea of like these foods becoming processed before you get to them. But I feel like if we think about like black beans, right? So you can buy them canned and they're not great for you. They're better than eating Taco Bell, but they're not, ideal. But you can buy them dried, right? And then you can just soak them. People don't do that anymore, but you can. I do it all the time. I was raised doing that.
This guy bragging about his soaked beans.
Right. My point being that like we have to find a way to get to the line of easiest way to consume, make it scalable, and then allow people to experience the diversity of that food. And part of that is making it easier to grow, bringing down the cost, normalizing it. That's what normal norm's all about, is making things normal. There's a lot of different facets to the question, but like we talked about the blueberries and why it was able to scale up, and why pecans were able to scale up into like a crop. And I think those are like really good examples of like the diversity of tactics that can work at the right place at the right time. And I think groundnuts just needs that moment.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of thinking groundnut curly fries, personally.
Those would probably be pretty good.
I think there could be I think a lot of people could get on board with high protein fries. I know that's not sort of solving anything fundamental in our food systems and diet and general health.
Yeah, but you can pre-cook them and freeze them, which is perfect. That's exactly what I'm talking about. See,
I just want it through the drive-thru instead. Oh, I want the groundnut at the drive-thru instead. I plan to change nothing else.
That's it. It's all you want in life.
Mm-hmm. That's how we do it, folks.
That's beautiful. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, go check out, or if you're tired of listening to my voice, want to read more about this, read some of the studies or research papers, You can go to agroecologies.org, go read up on it right there. It should be free if this episode is out. Otherwise, they're paywalled until the episodes come out. So if you see other subjects that we haven't covered in the audio show, you can become a paid subscriber. Go read about it right away. Don't even have to listen to me talk. Doesn't that sound wonderful?
That'd be great. I'd love to not have to hear you.
Oh, thank you, Matt.
But I can't afford our Patreon.
You can't. It's a lot. It's $2 whole a month.
I don't even make peanuts. I make groundnuts.
His peanuts are below, well, they're both below the ground. Sorry. It was a terrible joke, and I ruined it even further by being technically correct. So, yeah, hopefully you guys learned a thing. Next week, we have an interview that is very related to this. I think you guys will like it. And we'll be back. What are we covering next, Matt? Do you know? Or is it a big old surprise?
Well, it's always a surprise to me.
That's fun for you. Sunchokes. We're going to be talking sunchokes.
Oh, hell yeah.
So speaking of the sunchokes, we're going to go to the other side.
Oh, yeah.
All right, guys. Bye.
Bye. Cool. Sorry, that was sort of a gross sound out of my... I'm trying to... Cool.